It reminds you of the time when you had gone too far. Some years ago, Sports Illustrated chronicled the story, it was a bizarre story. It took place in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was at a high school football game. Albuquerque Academy was playing against St. Pius. It was a championship game. And the players from the academy could not understand the strange slashes, scratches, and cuts on their arms and hands. One player, even in going to the sideline, was bleeding so much that after the game, he required 10 stitches to close the cut. And he said to the coach, it feels like they've got razor blades or something. And sure enough, one of the referees performed an inspection, and they discovered that the offensive lineman wore chin straps, and the buckles had been sharpened to a razor's edge. Further investigation would conclude that one of the players from St. Pius' father was a pediatric dentist, and he admitted to sharpening the buckles because the previous game, his son had been unfairly mistreated, and he had so much hostility in his heart that whoever would play against his team would suffer because his son had suffered. They would end up suspending this father from all high school games. Hatred is dangerous, isn't it? We ought to be cautioned not to house hatred in our hearts, because hatred in the heart does not stay there. Hatred in the heart moves to the head. And if we're not careful, we will begin planning ways and means to get at people who have in some way hurt us. It doesn't remain in the heart, nor does it remain in the head. Ultimately, it lands in our hands. And it doesn't remain in our hands, but we use our hands to inflict pain on those who in some way have been hostile towards us. Not only is hatred dangerous, but hatred is also deadly. Some years ago, hate crimes in this country had numbers of 5,800 people. 5,800 people had lost their lives as a result of hate crimes. For the following year, it was more than 5,800. It had reached over 6,100. All because of persons having housed hate in their hearts. So now we get a better sense of why Dr. King would say these words: let no man pull you low enough to hate him. And then now we also get a sense, and we're cautioned to be careful with hatred and hate. Morgan Richard Oliver, she says, no matter how much hurt comes to us, we never want hate to come from us. And the saying goes, the fuel, the burning, even the yearning that you and I have in our hearts towards someone else will burn us more than them. Or to want to destroy another person because of something they have done to us is like burning our own house down for one rat. But we're familiar with what Jesus says to us about how we are to respond to our enemies. And that is, there will be people who will be hostile towards us. But let them be hostile towards us. We are not to be hostile towards them. You and I will always have haters. We will always have people who will respond in hostility or with hostility towards us. We will always have them. But Jesus, he says, that's not the way we are to respond to them. We all understand that the love of God was made manifest when Jesus came. If you want to know what God is like, then look at his son, Jesus. If we're to understand the love of God, then we must pay close attention to the revolutionary love of the Lord Jesus Christ. The Old Testament says, love your neighbors as you love yourself. But Jesus takes it to another level. And he gives us this new ethic. And he says in Luke chapter 6, in verses 27 and 28, he says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. It's a tall order, isn't it? Jesus challenges us. This is not a cakewalk. This is not something that we just snap our fingers and we're there. No. It takes time. It takes circumstances. It takes situations. And it has to, first and foremost, be something in our heart that we long to do. We want to be like who? Jesus. This is unnatural. It's natural to love people who love you. It's unnatural, however, to love people who are hostile towards you. And yet Jesus, he challenges us to this unnatural, unimaginable, unusual height of agape in loving our enemies. So how are you doing in that area? There's nobody in the room but us today, so you can, I'm not going to tell anybody. How are you doing as it relates to responding to others who are in some way have responded to you with hostility? And Jesus says it's natural, again, to love people who love you. It's unnatural, however, to love people in spite of the hostility that they've shown and continue to show towards you. And he gives us several examples of what this looks like in real time. For those of you who were here, you remember. But if today is your day and you were not here last Sunday, I'll give you a brief review. Jesus says to us that we are to perform unnatural deeds. It's right here, verses 27 and 28. He says, love your enemies, and he says, do good. This is not jungle warfare. The believer knows nothing about jungle warfare. The world knows about jungle warfare. Believers know about what? Spiritual warfare. And that is, the world is good at tit for tat. The world is good at, I'm going to get you before you get me. And if you get me, I'm going to get you back. The world is great at that. But when the world cannot handle people who do not know God, people who do not belong to God in terms of their faith in him, they are messed up. They are disoriented. They are disorganized when we do good to them in spite of how they are mistreating us. They don't know how to handle that. Judas was messed up when he knew he was going to take Jesus out. He was part of the plan. And yet what does Jesus do? He gives him a piece of bread. And that is that challenge to you, and that is that challenge to me. You got to learn how to give Judas a piece of bread. That is, do good. Perform a deed. But not only does he tell us that we could put this unnatural love on display by performing deeds. That is to say, it's not just talking about it, it's what? Being about it. It's not just lipping it, it's what? Living it. Again, it's Jesus, and he's on the cross. And the first words out of his mouth, Father, forgive them. They know not what they are doing. But then he goes on and he gives us another example of this unnatural love. It's not only performing, as you recall, it's not only performing unnatural deeds. That's action. Those are efforts. But he goes in the next verse and he says, proclaim unnatural words. He says, bless those who what? Curse you. This word bless, translated, gives us our word eulogy. And to eulogize is to what? Speak well of others. It is to only have good talk to come from your mouth. It is the type of person who does not try to recruit people to dislike the person that they dislike. Anybody ever tried to make you dislike somebody that they don't like? And they tried to get you on their side. And they try to tell you everything negative and bad about someone, and they want you to feel the same way. Be careful, because if they talk about somebody to you, guess what? They'll talk about you to somebody else. And so he challenges us to only speak well about others to others. The old folks used to say, if you ain't got nothing good to say, don't say nothing. Here's another one I came upon lately. It said, if you don't know the whole truth, keep your whole mouth shut. That's a good one, isn't it? You might want to write that down and post it or something. And yet we know people who will speak ill about us to other people. Jesus says, let that be them, and don't let that be you. He says, bless those who what? Curse you. And to curse is to invoke the punishment of God upon them. Again, it is to in some way get people to join in or to get on our side in trying to destroy people and trying to bring people down. It's a way in which God's people are not to be guilty of. He says, bless those who what? Curse you. That's challenging, isn't it? It's challenging. There again, we have examples for application. Stephen, one of the first deacons, he is being stoned to death. And as the people are hurling stones at him, he looks up into heaven and he says, God, do not lay this charge against them, this sin against them. That's a tall order, isn't it? And that leads us to this third means of applying unnatural love. Yes, we perform good deeds. We proclaim good words, but then we petition unnatural prayers. He says, pray. Verse 28, pray for those who what? Abuse you. Now that's major because at first he tells us to bless those. That is to say that when you bring them up, when you bring their name up to other people, it's always positive. But now he says, even when you talk to God, wow. He says, now you're not just praying for just, anybody. You are literally praying for people who see you as their prey. P-R-E-Y. He says, let them see you as their prey, but you are never to see them as your prey. Do you see people the way they see you? Or do you see them the way God sees you? How are you handling people who are hostile towards you? They see you as their prey. They're not, when they look at you, I know it looks like they're grinning, but literally they are growling. Do not, Jesus says, do not see them the way they see you. You have to see them the way your Father sees them. Is not God a merciful God? Slow to what? Anger. Quick to what? Pardon. It's a tall order, isn't it? He says, pray for them. He says, pray for them. Petition God in their behalf. Intercede for them. Call their names out before God. God bless them. God forgive them. God save them. That is to be our conversation with God concerning those who are hostile towards us. And while the disciples are just sitting there with their mouths open, eyes bucked about what Jesus has told them concerning their enemies. These were 3 bombshells. But now Jesus drops 2 more explosions. He says, yes, perform unnatural deeds. Yes, proclaim unnatural words. Yes, petition unnatural prayers. But he gives us 2 more. And the first is that he's talking about unnatural gentleness. You see it? He says in verse 29, to one who what? Strikes you. Now, if you needed to step out, this is not the time to do it. Hold on, wait a minute, I'll be done in a moment. He says to the one who what? Strikes you on the cheek. Do what? Offer the other also. The person is nodding next to you, elbow them real good. Wake them up to hear this. This word hit, it could also be translated as a backhand slap. Or it could also be translated as to be hit from the blind side. And so that we get this, I'm going to have Brother Gripper, he's going to come down. And then Brother Crenshaw. Brother Crenshaw is going to be looking at the wall. And out of nowhere, Gripper is going to knock the daylights out of it. And once, stay right there, hold on. And once, I'm going to tell them what's going to happen so they won't be so shocked when they see it happen. And once Crenshaw regains consciousness, asking, did y'all get the license plate of that truck that just hit me? Gripper is going to go to the opposite side. Crenshaw is going to give him a good look. And then he's going to take another one. Are y'all ready for this? Some years ago, you probably remember this. There was a younger Bush who was president, and he was in the Middle East, and he was making a speech, a presentation, and he said something, and someone in the crowd picked up a shoe and threw it at him. and he ducked. He missed it. But he turned the other cheek because he did not have him arrested, did not have him punished. He realized that there was some cultural nuance that had taken place. And so he did not return a lick. And what Jesus is saying, you got to know how to take a punch without responding with a lick. That is to say, we're not to be anyone's punching bag. He's not talking about that. He says, but you got to learn that sometimes the punch can be people talking about you, the very people you trusted. And he says, just because they are talking bad about you does not mean you strike at them by talking bad about them. Just let them keep on talking. He says, are the people who don't understand you and speak ill of you and mistreat you and misunderstand you and do everything they can to wreak havoc in your life, drama in your life. He says, do not swing back just because people are swinging on you. He says, these are non-life-threatening blows. You got to learn how to take a punch and keep on moving. I call it the Timex reflex. You take a licking and you keep on ticking. Listen, when you are living for God, you don't have time to swing back at people just because they are swinging at you. You don't have time to stop living for him. You don't have time to get back at people. You just don't have time to put people in their place and to get people told and to chase people down who you know are after. You just don't have time for that. There are bigger fish for you to fry. So Jesus is saying, listen, even when your ego take a punch, learn how to deal with it. Even when your pride is being attacked, learn how to deal with it. Even when your integrity is being questioned, your character is being assassinated or attacked, don't worry about it. He says, you're not the type of person who responds to other people the same way they respond to you. You're not that type of person. Former First Lady Michelle said it like this: when they go high or when they go low, you what? You go high. That's all she's saying. That's all Jesus is saying here. It's a tall order, isn't it? How you dealing with that? How you dealing with people who have taken a swing on you? When you find out. It's tough, isn't it? But as God's people, you got to learn how to take a hit without coming back with a lick. But then he gives us one more. And this it fits into that category of generosity. Gustav and his wife, Martha, they met at Harvard Law School in 1955. It was some years later where Harvard Law School would record the highest donation that had ever been given to a law school, ever. This couple gave them $13 million. They met there when they were first-year students, 1955. As soon as they finished the final examination, the two of them were married. Neither practiced law, but they had law degrees. Gustav would go on to become a CEO at Warner Brothers. He had his own Hauser Communications company. He was one of the developers of Nickelodeon. I mean, he was a successful individual. And so at one of their anniversaries, it must have been about 50 years, they came back to Harvard and they donated $13 million for this reason. They felt that Harvard had something to do with bringing them together. And as a demonstration of their gratitude to Harvard, they were generous. Did you just hear what I said? As a result of gratitude, they were generous. Because of the gratitude they had in their hearts, because of what had taken place at Harvard, they were moved, they were inspired to demonstrate it with dollars. Which says to me, if there is gratitude, generosity is somewhere near. Well, the opposite of that is also true. If there is no gratitude, if there is ingratitude, then there is somewhere nearby greed. If we are not appreciative to what we have, no matter how much more we have, we will never have enough. You know what greed is? Greed is this insatiable desire or appetite to have more than what you already have, but it will never be enough. It's just there's no satisfaction. And yet, when you think about the gratitude that this couple had in their heart towards the university, they didn't keep the gratitude to themselves. They responded with what? Generosity. So now Jesus says here, he says, if someone takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. What is Jesus really talking about? Of course, he wants us to be what? Good stewards, right? We are to be responsible with all that we have, right? And so what Jesus is really getting at is he wants to know, how are we dealing with possessions? He's talking to us about your grasp of possession, but then he's also talking about your gauge, how you gauge possessions. Your grasp of possessions, Jesus is talking about, he says that we are not to hoard our possessions. We are to simply hold our possessions. He says if you hoard your possessions, he says not only will you not share those possessions, but God cannot give you any more possessions. He says because we are hoarding our possessions. We are clinging to our possessions. Our life is about getting as much as we can, and we can as much as we get. He's talking about how we hold our possessions. He says you do not hold your possessions with a clenched hand, but you hold your possessions with an open hand. Easy come, easy go. The same God who put it in your hand has access to it. But if we clench the possessions, we take ownership of the possessions, and we no longer are stewards of the possessions. It's a danger to hold anything that God has given to you this way. Hold it this way. He has unlimited access to it. And how many of you know that God can replace your possessions? He can replenish your possessions, and he can reproduce your possessions. He can do exceedingly abundantly whatever we ask, think, or imagine. God can do it. He can do it. Jesus lived this life. He says, foxes have holes, birds of the nest have air, but the Son of Man have nowhere to what? Lay his head. And yet every time Jesus needed a place to rest, there was someone who provided it. And every time he needed a meal, he didn't perform a miracle. There was somebody's heart that God had touched and transformed. And it was time for him to be served. He was served. He never performed a miracle for himself. He only performed miracles for others. So there is this word here. There's this word. How we hold our possessions. How we grasp our possessions. There's the word. And here's the challenge. He says, you are not to oppose the needy. You are to assist the needy. And he says, you cannot put the needy in categories. That is to say, if they like me, I'm going to assist them. If they don't like me, see you, don't want to be you. He says you are not to oppose the needy. Now, he says it right here in these words. He says if someone take away your cloak, don't withhold your tunic. They can have that too. Give to everyone who what? Begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. What Jesus is literally, he is not telling us to just throw stuff away. He is speaking hyperbole. He is starting at a high place, and then he is going low, and then he starts at a low place and goes high. He is saying, I want you to get the big picture. Is at the end of the day, he says, it's not about people, it's about your heart concerning possessions. That's what he is talking about. But then he says, grasp, possession, you got to be careful. But then he says, how you gauge your possessions. Well, here's what Jesus is saying. Can't nobody answer this for you. You have to answer this for yourself. You can't answer for me. I can't answer for you. I have to answer for myself. Here's the challenge. Do we value possessions far more than people? Or do we value people far more than possessions? That's the question. if I value possessions more than people, then I have to keep what I have because I don't know when I'm going to get it again. But if I value people far more than possessions, the same God who did it last time can do it again. I mean, God is saying there's more from where that came from. If I bless you that time, surely I can bless it. I can bless you again. And if you use it in the way that I was meant for you to use it, there is more. Give and it shall be given to you, pressed down, shaken together, running over with what? People pour into your bosom. That is to say, God would not have any problem blessing you because he can trust you to do the right thing with what he blesses you with. I had this thing years ago. My girls, they were much younger. They were much younger. And Shay, the older daughter, she had a big bag of chips. And her baby sister, the one you met, Mackenzie was asking for some. And Shay turned her body to her and she wouldn't share with her. And so I said, put the chips up. And I went to the store and I got a 25-cent bag of chips. And I said, Shay, since you don't want to share with your sister, I can no longer give you bigger bags. I have to give you a smaller bag. It's amazing to me what God will do for you when you don't mind sharing with other people. But it's another thing that when you don't want to share with other people, it has a way of decreasing the size of your blessings. Because it is more blessed to Here's that challenging question, church. Do you value people far more than possessions? If so, you will share with them. You will. You can't help it. However, if you value possessions more than you value people, you will be selective. And Jesus says right here in these words, give to everyone who what? Begs from you. You say, well, Pastor, I won't have anything. He said, he says, don't forget the spirit of discernment. I got you. You'll know what to do, when to do. He says, don't look for reasons not to do it. See, it's a mindset. He says at the end of the day, it's not even the possession, it's your mindset. He said, if you look for an excuse, you always find one. He said, but if you are open to whatever I tell you to do, you won't be worried about what you're going to get or what you're going to gain or to lose. God says, I got you. It's natural to what? Love people who love us. It's unnatural to love the very people who are hostile towards you. It's unnatural. And yet, this is what he calls us to. He's given us several examples of this. So we have to wonder, how is this possible? I mean, where are we with fleshing this text out? Years ago, when he was a little boy, Tony Evans recalls the school where they had these radiators in the classroom where they would give off steam. It was the way that they would warm the buildings, the way they would warm classrooms. There were radiators in the classroom. And he got to know the custodian pretty well. And so one day the custodian took him to the boiler room. And there in the boiler room was all these big tanks. And he saw this huge tank. And he recalls there was a small cylinder hanging on this tank. And it had a line on it. And the line, it was like a marker. It could show him how much water was in the tank. And the radiator itself was too hot for them to touch in the boiler room. He said, but the way you could get a sense of what was going on the inside was that you could see where the water was concerning the line. There is a way that you and I can measure how full of God we are. There's a gauge. And the gauge is this. How can you say you love God and you've never seen him, and despise, hate your brother, sister whom you see daily? In essence, what the Bible is telling us, the love that we have for God plays itself out in how we treat other people. Remember, I mentioned it last week. Jesus says, I give you a new commandment, that you what? Love one another as what? I have loved you. And by this, people will know you are what? My disciples. So, this vertical situation, God and self, plays itself out in the horizontal. The love that I have for God, who I cannot see, plays itself out in how I treat the very people who I can see. And now to end this discussion, the way Jesus ends it, he stops talking about unnatural love and starts talking about natural love. He was a masterful teacher, wasn't he? There's this contrast at the end. Verse 32, here's the contrast. He's no longer, so far he's been talking about unnatural. Love those who hate you, bless those who curse, right? Give to those and not expecting any return. Oh, that's unnatural. You know, we give somebody, you know, where my money, man? That's unnatural. But now he gets to the natural. Listen to what he says. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Listen to the contrast. For even sinners or pagans, heathens, those whom God has created, but they are not our sisters and brothers yet in Christ. They are outside of the new covenant. He says, for this is what they do. Sinners love those who what? Love them. And it says, and if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even, there it is, sinners do the same. And then he says, and if you, verse 34, if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. And now he masterfully goes back. He loops it. He goes back. Look at verse 35. But love your enemies. He's not going to leave them hanging. This is what he wants. He says last what he wants them to remember first. But love your enemies. Do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Here it is. Here it is. And your reward will be great. And you will be sons and daughters of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful even as your Father is merciful. Here's the catch. Although you and I at one time were enemies of God, and yet he woke us up in the morning. He allowed the sun to shine on us. He fed us. He clothed us. We were outside, but God treated us as though we were insiders. And so now he says, if you respond that same way to others, you will be considered as sons and daughters of the Most High. And he says, be merciful even as your Father is merciful.